ABC Radio Brisbane.
Streaming live online and on the ABC Listen app. This is ABC Radio Brisbane with Steve Austin.
If you're travelling on the trains, you don't have to worry about the traffic. Despite the fact that it's first day back at school, normally traffic is at its heaviest around these times. But all the trains are running on time. And I mention the trains because you'll want to hear my next story, which really goes to the heart of what's wrong here in Queensland and why our systems of accountability go awry. 23 degrees in Brisbane, Bayside 22, Logan 23, Ipswich 25, the Gold Coast 20 and the Sunshine Coast 22. Give me a call if you see something happening around the streets of Brisbane. 1300 222 612 is a phone number, or send a text 0467 922 612. Well, a major embarrassment in court this morning for the Crime and Corruption Commission when they offered no evidence against rail advocate and self-described whistleblower Mr. Paul Pluta. Mr. Pluta warned then Minister for Transport Sterling Hinchliffe about a looming train driver shortage. Now, you know this story as rail fail. After it was revealed that Queensland Rail didn't have enough train drivers, the CCC started investigating how a report was released to the media. The CCC controversially used their coercive hearing powers against Paul Pluta, who was alleged to have leaked the report of the QR train driver shortage at the beginning of the rail fail. The CCC charged Mr. Pluta not with leaking any documents, but actually with telling someone, passing on to a third party, that he had been hauled before their star chamber using the coercive powers. Now, let me just clarify for you, make very clear. The Crime and Corruption Commission is Queensland's peak crime fighting body. It has extraordinary powers, the powers of a standing royal commission. And in their own words, the CCC's coercive hearings power is, quote, most often sought by Queensland Police for unsolved murders, organised crime investigations involving drug trafficking, money laundering, or crimes involving the use of weapons. End of quote. So why did they use their coercive powers on a middle-aged, overweight white guy? In his own words. Paul Pluta, you don't see this entirely as a win for you in the court today. Why not?
Oh, look. It's definitely not a win in the sense that, look, I'm very happy with the result. Let's just clarify that there. I mean,
yes.
I'm a lower middle class, overweight white guy. Okay, to continually mount legal battles, hugely costly. This is a fantastic result for me because basically my case against the CCC was dismissed today by a magistrate. The prosecution offered no evidence against me, so I am over the moon. Okay, so let's not avoid that. But no, I'm very happy with the way justice has prevailed, and it didn't go to a trial. So I mean, look.
But it's not a win. The CCC offered no evidence, and I think that frustrates you somewhat.
No. I don't want to sell my house. I don't want to sell everything of value to fight senseless battles with David. David and Goliath.
David and Goliath.
Okay?
So let me ask you a couple of specific questions. First of all, did you think it was appropriate that the Crime and Corruption Commission used their coercive hearings powers, normally reserved for drug kingpins and organised crime people, to pursue you?
This is an interesting question. If you look back at the original Fitzgerald edict when they set this type of thing up, for whistleblower type people like me, where I have made no financial advantage, I have gained nothing but trouble out of it. This was purely public interest. For whistleblower type people, in the past, you needed to get sign-off from a very senior judge. I think it may have been a Supreme Court judge, but if not a Supreme Court judge, it's certainly a very senior judge. Now, the CCC is basically judge, jury, and executioner all in one. And I got to be completely honest with you. What sort of state has secret police? Okay, what sort of state has coercive hearings? So you don't have the right to silence. I've never heard of these things before.
Well, then let me ask you. I'll get you to answer my question. I said, did you think it's appropriate for the Crime and Corruption Commission to use their coercive powers, normally reserved for organised crime figures, to pursue you over an embarrassing political leak on train driver numbers?
I think it's absolutely disgusting. I mean, if anything, they should be giving me a gong. They should be giving me a medal for standing up and saying, hey, here's the faults. I mean, the emperor has no clothes. I mean, I got to be honest with you. I used to drink the Kool-Aid, the ALP Kool-Aid, okay? I was a young Labor. I even made a cup of tea for Wayne Goss years ago. And I believed when Labor was in, you could have freedom of speech. You weren't arrested. You weren't, they didn't have secret interviews. And I got to tell you the truth, the Kool-Aid I was drinking is a lie, okay? The Kool-Aid I was drinking is a lie. There is only freedom of speech in Queensland if you say what the government is saying. You make a minister look bad, you make them look bad, they will come after you, okay? And I've got to tell you this. You look at my case.
Well, let me ask you, your case was one where, at the beginning of the rail fail, as it's now known, yes, you got hold of and released a document, the INDEC report, that revealed that there was a known train driver shortage looming in Queensland Rail, and you released it to the media. The minister at the time, Sterling Hinchliffe, was embarrassed and clearly didn't know. Do you see what took place where the Crime and Corruption Commission charged you as some sort of political payback, do you?
Look, let me tell you this. Even before I released, that was the INDEC report, I had written to the minister personally. That was the first flare-up in the newspaper.
Sterling Hinchliffe.
I had written to Sterling and told him the problems. I'd even written to the CCC to tell them about the problems. To be honest with you, I'd already gone to them and said, hey, this is some problems. They told me to get stuffed. I got a form letter back from Sterlo, and I got a form letter back from the CCC, which basically said, get stuffed.
You mean no case, didn't listen to you, no case to answer, nothing to see here?
Just a form letter, a fob off.
Okay, but I think that later came out that the Minister, Sterling Hinchliffe, wasn't aware of the INDEC report that identified there was a looming train driver shortage.
That's correct. And the interesting thing is, in Parliament itself, in Hansard, they actually used my copy of the INDEC report, which was later than the copy that was supplied to Sterling himself by the department.
So my question to you was, do you regard this as some form of political payback, the fact that you were charged under what's the powers, the coercive hearings powers, where you lose the right to silence? It's called the Star Chamber, and normally it's reserved for organised crime figures and drug lords, and yet they pursued you,
of course,
Paul Pluta, a railways advocate.
This is complete payback. I mean, if you say anything against the government, I'd like to make it as a warning there. If there's any people out there who are thinking of whistleblowing, put your head in the sand. Don't reveal nothing. These people will come after you. They will bankrupt you. Let me tell you this. I had the police turn up at my house 3 times.
3 times the Crime and Corruption Commission served you with notices to appear.
Correct.
Do you regard that as some form of harassment?
It's either absolute incompetence. I'm not making any statement on it. I'm just telling you the facts.
Yes.
You can make whatever you want of it. Are they that hopeless? I don't know. I don't know. How could they have got it wrong? I got 3 notices to appear. Now, they allege they made a mistake on one of the dates. They allege these things. But yes, I cannot believe that senior, experienced task force like this, it seems very, very, very strange. Okay?
Can I ask you then, Paul Pluta, does the Parliamentary Oversight Committee, the Crime and Corruption Committee, or the Parliamentary Commissioner need to examine how this happened, how an ordinary guy who's a rail advocate ends up getting dragged before the Star Chamber of the Crime and Corruption Commission and charged, and when it actually gets to court, as has happened to you today, the prosecution from the Crime and Corruption Commission didn't even offer any evidence? Does that need to be examined by the Parliamentary Committee or the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Crime and Corruption Commission?
This is what they should be looking to. Don't worry about my case. Don't worry about my case. I honestly, I am happy the matter is over. I can go back to my lower middle class ways in my lower middle class suburb.
You wrote to the then minister, Sterling Henchleff, and advised him of a looming train driver shortage.
Yes.
You've now proved your case.
Yes.
It's now been proved that you were right.
Yes.
And all the authorities ignored you.
Yes.
So what's your feeling then about when you tried to warn both the minister in the Queensland government, and you even went to the Crime and Corruption Commission initially to warn them that something was wrong, that for some reason they weren't doing anything about this looming train driver shortage? You've proved your case.
Yes, well, I tell you what, I've paid a high price.
And so what's your message to the state government then?
My advice to anyone out there is, don't get involved. Don't whistleblow. They will drag you through the mud. I mean, if I had a conventional job, do you think turning up at court 7 times, it's a great way to get your contract extended. It's a great way to get a promotion when you're constantly taking days off to appear at court cases.
What's been the effect on your life, Paul Pluta?
My life is absolutely devastated. I tell you what, I've learned a very valuable lesson. Do not whistleblow. You are told. You are told. I had Terry O'Gorman's firm represented me at that stage. If they think I'm lying, I can be jailed. If I don't answer a question, I can be jailed. If I refuse to answer, you can be jailed. If I don't turn up, can be jailed. What sort of state has a secret police force on its citizens? I'm a clean skin. I haven't been charged. I've got a clean record. I'm just a lower middle class, boring guy. Okay, I've never seen this sort of... I didn't know. This is the most scariest event of my life.
Paul Pluta, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Rail advocate Paul Pluta, the man who advised the Queensland government and the Crime and Corruption Commission that there was a problem in QR, a man who advised the minister that there was a train driver shortage. He was subsequently proved correct, but for reasons that have not been clearly answered, the Crime and Corruption Commission, Queensland's peak crime-fighting body, took him into their star chamber under their coercive powers provisions, questioned him, and because he told a third party that he'd been questioned in their star chamber, they then laid charges against him. The matter was heard in a Brisbane court today, and the CCC, the Crime and Corruption Commission, offered no evidence. Now, we're pursuing this story. You'll hear... I should mention, by the way, that we've spoken previously with Terry O'Gorman about this. The Council of Civil Liberties expressed their very real concern about what the Crime and Corruption Commission have done to a citizen. To find out today that they didn't even bother to offer evidence. Now, I didn't hear what the judge had to say, but I wish I was. They offered no evidence. We'll be speaking with Mr. O'Gorman, we believe, just after 6 this evening about what should happen next. And we'll put in a call. We have, I should mention, by the way, we did call the Crime and Corruption Commission at 1:30 this afternoon. At this stage, I've not heard back from them. We also contacted Queensland's Attorney General's office, Yvette Darth. At this stage, we've not heard back from her either. That's from now.
This is ABC Radio Brisbane with Steve Austin.
Well, let's go back to the matter in court today where rail advocate and self-described whistleblower Paul Pluta faced court after the Crime and Corruption Commission brought charges against him. When the matter was heard in court today, the Crime and Corruption Commission offered no evidence.
This is complete payback. I mean, if you say anything against the government, I'd like to make it as a warning there. If there's any people out there who are thinking of whistleblowing, put your head in the sand. Don't reveal nothing.
That's Paul Pluta from earlier on today. Terry O'Gorman from the Council of Civil Liberties said he should never have been subject to the coercive hearing power in the first place. Now, I should make it clear that Mr. O'Gorman's law firm did at one stage act for Mr. Pluta, but because of the secrecy rules under the Crime and Corruption Commission Act, Mr. O'Gorman is not permitted to discuss what another lawyer in his firm did as a part of his representation of Paul Pluta. And Mr. O'Gorman only learnt of this connection tonight. So Terry O'Gorman, Mr. Pluta's clearly upset. He faced charges. Why?
Well, he faced charges according to news reports today for showing to someone else a summons that commanded him to appear before the Star Chamber. Now, having listened to Mr. Pluta's obviously very upset interview this afternoon, one can understand his being upset. He had to prepare and no doubt pay lawyers to go to court for him today. The matter was dropped. His angst and his outrage can be understood. He's got the right, as anyone else does, who has a complaint about the Crime and Corruption Commission, to go to the Parliamentary Commissioner, who's got the power to investigate it, and then refer it to the Parliamentary Committee. What should the Parliamentary Commissioner examine? Well, the Parliamentary Commissioner should examine all aspects of Mr. Pluta's complaint. As you said in the intro, I only learned when I heard the interview with Mr. Pluta half an hour ago that, in fact, someone else within my firm represented him, and as you observed, the secrecy rules, or laws, not just rules, prevent me from even discussing with that solicitor what went on in that case. But listening to Mr. Pluta, he clearly is outraged. He clearly is a quite public-spirited sort of fellow. He sees that he's been victimised, and it's important for his grievance and for the public perception that arises from his grievance that the Parliamentary Commissioner step in, contact Mr. Pluta and say, OK, I've heard your interview, you want to make a complaint, I'll investigate it. I'll leave it there and see what happens down the track. Terry O'Gorman, thanks for your time. Thanks, Steve. Terry O'Gorman, Queensland Council for Civil Liberties. Mr. O'Gorman's firm did at one stage act for Mr. Pluta, but because of secrecy laws under the Crime and Corruption Commission Act, we're not permitted to discuss what another lawyer in his firm did as part of the representation of Paul Pluta. I have received a very brief reply from the Crime and Corruption Commission saying simply that they are considering their options, and we will put in further calls to the State Government and the Parliamentary Crime and Corruption Commission Oversight Committee to find out if they're prepared to take a look at this matter.
Hello, Linda. QR's got no one to blame except themselves.
Paul Pluta is the whistleblower behind documents which revealed the extent of the driver shortage.
It's the executives at QR who should be ashamed of themselves. They should get out of their Statesman, get out of their 5 Series BMW and take the train.
Since the data was collected, the Queensland rail saga has claimed a Transport Minister and a CEO. Now a new minister says she's determined to fix it.
Queensland's Crime and Corruption Commission has helped break open some of the state's biggest cases in recent years. Its secretive coercive hearings have forced witnesses to give up vital information, but some critics say the powers are being overused and go too far.
This is one of Queensland's most secretive rooms. Those called to testify in the so-called Star Chamber have no right to silence. If they refuse to cooperate or lie, they can be jailed.
They're a very powerful tool we use, but we take very seriously the use of them, and we have to convince ourselves that there is a proper basis to use the powers.
Evidence from CCC hearings helped convict 2 men over the McCulkin murders, a crime that had been unsolved since the 70s. In the Tiali Palmer case, the CCC trapped her foster family in a lie. Eventually, they gave up the killer, foster father Rick Thorburn. But while there's widespread support for the Star Chamber's use in major investigations, there's also concern the right to silence is being taken away in low-level cases.
There has to be some balance, a balance between police powers, CCC powers on the one hand and civil liberties on the other.
Over a decade, the number of investigative hearings have quadrupled to more than 340 a year. In 2017, Brisbane YouTuber Paul Pluta leaked top-secret documents detailing problems with Queensland Rail timetables and trains.
Newgen is a huge up.
It's understood he was summoned to the Star Chamber and forced to reveal his source. He's since been charged with allegedly revealing he was called to face a hearing.
It'd be different if you were talking about a terrorist incident, but this was talking about problems within Queensland rail that needed in the public interest to be disclosed.
People who have access to confidential information are under an obligation of trust not to disclose that without very good reason. If there's, for instance, a belief that they want to blow the whistle, as it were, they should come to us confidentially.
The CCC doesn't release transcripts or recordings of its coercive hearings. In many cases, even telling someone you've been summoned to testify can be an offence. Civil libertarians want the powers reined in, but the CCC insists it's kept in check by the courts and a parliamentary oversight committee. Christian Silva, ABC News.